This morning is a conversation about school culture and what we want culture in our school to look like. But before we get there, I wanted to share with you some of the very few things I know about art history and historical art. Every once in a while, friends come in from out of town and they invariably want to go to the Art Institute in Chicago. And I'm sure all of you all have been there. And for whatever reason, this particular painting is the one that always kind of blows me away. Like most people, I'm not the only one. I mean, Cameron and Ferris were also blown away by this. And I wanted so bad to start with the video clip of Cameron getting drawn into George Seurat's painting. But really, for those of you guys who are Ferris fans, that's really where the inappropriate material between Ferris and Sloan, come about, because he uses this as an opportunity to go and mash, while Cameron uses this as an opportunity to go and try to understand a painting in a much, much deeper way. We're going to come back to this painting quite a bit, but it has something to do with what we're trying to learn about today. Now, George Seurat tried to deflect, praise with regards to his artistic ability. He wanted to be seen as a scientist that wanted to demonstrate something scientific in this painting that people didn't notice or have the nuances right away. He wanted to show the world that he could paint in a very different way, to make colors be seen in a very different way, by not doing any brush strokes at all on this painting. The fact is, when Seurat painted this image, he just made millions and millions and millions of dots. Tiny, tiny, tiny dots, one on top of the next. And that's why Cameron really was transfixed by it, because as you get really, really close to the painting, that's really all you can see. Today, we're going to talk about culture. And I think the painting is appropriate because it's really hard to look for evidence about culture. Many of us were sitting around the other day and we were talking about, what does District 117 do better than any other district? Jim McKay brought us as leaders the book Good to Great and Great by Choice by Jim Collins. And in that work, Jim Collins says really, really successful organizations figure out what they do best. They focus on it and they keep getting better and better and better at it. So what I'm going to describe to you today is what I actually think we as a culture do the best, without question. I think one of the things we do the best is we think about the whole kid in this district. We are an incredibly student-centered organization. Every teacher, department chair that I work with, I hear about their passion of talking about with kids. That's why, be truthful, like many of you, I would be ecstatic for my kids to go to Antioch Lakes High School, right? To walk through the halls, to have Tom Deischel as their chemistry teacher, to have Patrick Johnson teaching them journalism, to go over to Lakes, have Kurt Rouse in U.S. history, or Jeff Newton in AP biology. There are just so many incredible educators, and what makes them incredible is their passion for kids, and that's part of our culture. And what's also unique about District 117 that's a little different than other places I've been is it's not just about like a great athletic department or a great fine arts department, or we really care about AP. It seems like here people really think that kids need all of that, right? Kids need to be in orchestra, and they need to play a sport, and they need to be in theater, and they need some very rigorous courses. And we care about all those things. We think about all those things about being the quality experience. The other thing you see here is you see incredibly polite interactions between adults and students all the time. If you haven't noticed it, watch how many times kids open the door for you, tell you good morning, right? How many times you see teachers do the exact same thing. It's really powerful. It's what we do best. We have an incredible culture within our building. So we're going to look at some data that tells us about our culture. And I'm sharing this because this is what we already do the best. But I think we can also do it even better than what we do. If you look at Seurat's painting really, really up close, it tells you nothing. This is exactly how I see walkthrough data. How many of you all have had someone perform a walkthrough in your classroom? Those walkthroughs tell us absolutely nothing about your classroom. I think it's really important for you to hear that. They're not meant to. About a month ago, we performed over 850 walkthroughs. And individually, they're just dots. They mean absolutely nothing. They could have walked in when you happen to be tutoring one kid, and so it said a not engaged classroom. Right? You could have walked in when you were taking attendance, which you're required to do. You may be a teacher that only had one joint group learning activity all year long. And we walked in during it, and it said, wow, student center engaged classroom. Walkthroughs are like this. They tell us absolutely nothing on their own. But like Thoreau's painting, if you get enough of them, it starts to paint a picture about what happens to a kid as they go throughout their day. This has nothing to do with us as individuals. This has to do with our culture. What's our experience like from the time a kid enters our building to the time they end? What types of experiences do they have? Our walkthrough data is powerful. We took 850 pieces, little dots of data. As a science guy, I kind of think about that like pixels, you know? Some of you have really great cameras. Some of you guys have really crummy cameras. Really the difference between a great camera and a crummy camera in the digital age is how many pixels you have. And ultimately, the more pixels, the crisper the image. But without many pixels, they don't tell us very much. But I think that there are things that could be gleaned from our walkthroughs, because I think 850 walkthroughs taken over a 48-hour period of time is enough pixels to paint some pictures that we should reflect on. The data that I'm going to share is in your packet if you'd like to see it, as well as descriptions as far as what we are looking for. But the reality is, we do see students actively engaged in classrooms, right? About 13% of the time, you see active, student-centered engagement. We can have conversations in our department. Is that number too high? Is it too low? Would we like to see more? Ultimately, when you look at those big two columns, that 35.7 and 33.7, we're talking about teacher-led direct instruction and different versions of it. So typically, when we walk into our classrooms, about 2/3 of the time, we see direct instruction at both Lakes and Antioch. This data is compiled between the two schools. And actually, the data is incredibly similar between the two schools. Right? And for those of you guys who did the walkthroughs, I've heard over and over again how common and how similar the teaching is. How there's excellent teachers delivering awesome instruction at both schools. Both schools are doing an incredible job in our middle and high classes. As a side, lots of side conversations are saying both schools are really struggling with our lowest level classes. Our interventions, our extended periods, right? They don't see as much of the kind of learning that's representative as a whole. But luckily, there's very few of those sections. We have done an incredible job providing opportunities for all kids across all of our middle and upper level courses. If we look at trends, though, as you know, if you've been here for a while, this is the 4th time we've done one of these walkthrough. It's called an IPI survey. Really, it's a culture survey about student engagement and activities within the classrooms. In an ideal world, you want to see the shift moving towards the right. The right is about student-centered classrooms. Kids doing the thinking work, kids doing the activities, kids doing the problem solving. The farther you get to the left, the teacher is doing the work. The teacher is doing the teaching, the thinking work for their students. In theory, we would want to see trends to our right as a culture across the way. Right? Right now, we're seeing a little bit of very marginal pullback from previous years to more and more direct instruction, more teacher-led instruction. So maybe there should be conversations about that. And when you form your groups, I hope that's part of the things that you talk about. I wonder if we looked at the day a little bit differently. Walkthroughs are one interesting way, but if you've been reading a lot lately, there's new protocols coming about saying, what happened if you shadowed kids and you just followed them from the time they got to school to the time they left? Right? What would happen? What kind of learning experiences would they have? What kind of interactions would they have with their peers? And what would we want? Right? As we would watch them through their day, how many times would they be sitting and listening and taking notes? That's part of learning. How much would we want to see them do that? 6 hours out of their day? 4 hours out of their day? right? What would their day look like if we looked at it as a whole, as a culture? What about their interactions with adults? What would that look like, right? Lots of incredible positive interactions right here. Again, this is what we're best at. What would our data show truly about the number of positive interactions that our kids get with adults every day? Grant Wiggins, who most of you all know, is a professor at Harvard School of Education. He's the author of Understanding by Design, the model of which our curriculum is built here, a backwards design model. Last month, I know that many of you all were reading and talking about this blog, and if you haven't read it, I put a copy in your book. He talked about what happens to veteran teachers when they follow and shadow students all day. What do they learn? What kind of experiences do they have? What's it like to be a student, to come in the morning and leave? And then Wiggins challenges us, and using his backwards design model, he said, you know what? If you were going to backwards design the experience, what would you want the day to be like? What kind of things would you want the kids to be doing? I started making a list of things that I thought would be on my short list. Multiple interactions with text, arguments with evidence, physical activity during the day, many social interactions with peers, engagement with the arts, rigorous standards-based curriculum, positive interactions with adults. This list could go on. But you know, when I think about the kind of experiences I would most want for my kid going to school, it'd be here. And to be perfectly honest, as a parent, when I step out of my office, I probably care about that last one the most. When truth really comes down to it, I want my kids to go to a school where they have multiple positive interactions with adults. And that, by far and away, is again the #1 reason why I'd be ecstatic if my kids ever came to Antioch or Lakes High School. Because again, that's one of the things we do best. Some schools are starting to wrestle with this, thinking about the total experience. And so I'm going to invite Grant Murray to come up because Grant is going to describe a model that's used in St. Charles high schools. And it's used in a way to apply the Danielson-based rubric and framework in a way that's very different than most of us think about it. Most of us think about Charlotte Danielson as a way to do teacher evaluations and observations and high stakes. St. Charles said that's not really how we want to use this thing. We can use it that way too, but we want to use it in a way that's fundamentally different than that. We want to use it as a way to describe our culture, not in an individual classroom, not with an individual teacher, but as the culture of our building as a whole.
All right, good morning, everybody. First off, I'm by no means an expert on student shadowing, but I read the Wiggins article, and a dear friend of mine and former colleague of ours, Jeff Peterson, now works at St. Charles North. And so in a casual conversation at the end of an email, he put in, oh, by the way, I shadowed a student yesterday. It was an awesome experience. You should do it. And so instantly I fired back a reply and said, hey, Jeff, you got to tell me more about this. And if you know anything about Jeff, he's a very detail-oriented person. And so he sent me about 6 documents and a 3-page email explaining how their student shadowing program worked. So in your packet, I believe, and I'm going to project it up here, is some of the information that they use or some of the documentation that they use to shadow a student. The first thing that popped out to me when I looked at this was the link to the Danielson model. And so I asked Jeff, why the link to the Danielson model? What's the reaction to that? And he said that he felt like going through this process, and this is a process that St. Charles North uses for all first-year teachers, which is why Jeff was doing it. And he's also said that he thinks that there's a push towards having everyone do it, but they haven't gotten to that point yet. But when I asked him about the link to Danielson on this collection tool, this data collection tool, which is kind of hard to see up there, but I know it's in the packets, he said it felt like it gave focus to his observations. That he said he felt like otherwise people would be documenting, what kind of posters are on the wall in the classrooms rather than looking at what the student's actual experience is in the classroom. So he didn't seem to be taken aback by it, that it brought focus to the process. So each new teacher goes through this, spends a day with a student, and then afterwards they do some reflection, which I believe is right here. And so there's a series of reflection questions that are in the packet that they answer. And so my next question to him was, what do you do with this afterwards? And so they meet with their instructional coach, which from what I gathered from talking to him was kind of like a mix of what we do with our department chairs and our mentors. The instructional coach is a supervisor, not an evaluator. But the instructional coach sits down with the teacher and discusses with them what their reflections were, what they saw, what the experience was. And the most important thing that comes out of this is these discussions are what they use to drive their professional development for the year. So they make a list of, well, what observations did you make about what a student experiences? How can you tie this back to your classroom? And from there, how can you improve as a teacher and build on the experience for your students? So I don't want to go too far. I'm going to hand it back to Dr. Bain to explain the rest of the activity for today.
So again, today's about culture. And culture is really hard to look at in isolation. You can't just walk into somebody's classroom for 3 minutes. You can't just have one interaction with a kid in the hall. Culture is what we do. Culture is what's experienced by a kid from early in the morning till late in the afternoon to after school with sports, all of the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of interactions they have with other kids and adults throughout their school day, all the activities they have, the level, the rigor, the number of times they write, the number of times they're asked to make argument, the number of leadership opportunities they have. All that is encompassed in culture. We have two ways, really, we could think about that we think could be good measures of culture. One thing is walkthrough data. We want to continue to use walkthrough data because we think it provides pixels into painting a picture about a school day. So again, later on in the winter, we're going to do another walkthrough, very similar to what we did before. But please know, none of us think that walkthrough in and of itself tells us anything. It's only the 850 or 1,000 put together that paints a picture. The other thing we'd like to continue to experiment with is student shadowing and providing many of you student shadowing experiences to follow students, to watch them through their school day, to experience what life is like as a kid as they come in and come out. And this is not because we're doing anything wrong. This is because we're going to take the thing we do best and try to make it better, to try to think about it as a whole, outside of our own classrooms, outside of our own periods, but what we can do to make the experience of going to Lakes or Antioch as a whole even better than it already is. Today you're going to be placed in groups, and those groups are assigned by the top of your handout sheet. We hope to have 8 to 10 teachers in each group, and think about your peer group as a team of teachers, as if kids came into one of your classes and passed through all of your classes throughout the day. We're asking your group to wrestle with 5 questions and to record your answers in today's meet. You'll be working in either the Antioch Commons or you'll be working in the cafeteria, and projected around the rooms will be the comments of all the other groups. So if you're not sure, you're wondering what the other groups are thinking, take a look at the televisions up there and you'll see the responses. I asked that only one person respond from each group, so there's a conversation amongst everybody in the group, and then one person is who posts for you. And have that one person post with the group number. Say, I'm group number 11. And every time you have a thought about one of the questions, go ahead and start it out with group 11 and what your group's thought is about that. We'll pull all this down at the end of the day and distribute the responses of everyone. And hopefully this will lead to further conversations about the types of experiences we want with our kids, right, as we talk about this in our departments and our teams in future meetings. But again, thinking about this as developing the kind of academic, rigorous, social, positive culture that we have at Antioch Lakes and making it even better. Please feel free to take a 5-minute break, and then we'll start in about 5 minutes or so in the cafeteria or the commons. If you have groups number 1 through 10, you'll be in the commons. If you're in groups 11 through 20, you'll be in the Antioch cafeteria. Have a great day.